While this program is the end of Picasso at the Walker, it's actually the beginning of a very ambitious and exciting season of public programs here at the Walker, and I want to let you know about a couple of those upcoming programs. In November, we are going to be hosting two exceptional speakers here for lectures related to our fall exhibition called Brave New Worlds. And the first speaker in a little Mac lecture series is the cartoonist and comics journalist Joe Sacco. And we're very fortunate to have Sacco here in the Twin Cities with us. Like tonight's program, his presentation will be co-presented by Rain Taxi Review of Books and is in fact only possible because of Rain Taxi and the excellent negotiating skills of Rain Taxi's editor, Eric Lorberer. Apparently, Joe Sacco doesn't like to travel much outside of his work that has him traveling all over the world. So it really is very special that he has agreed to come to the Twin Cities. And that takes place on Tuesday, November 13th. And then following 2 weeks later, we will be hosting Janine DiGiovanni on Tuesday, November 27th. DiGiovanni is one of the world's top female foreign war correspondents. She has reported from every war-torn region in the world, and her focus is very much on human rights and reporting from the places in the world that the mainstream media has chosen to ignore. And her talk will focus on that and the role of journalists to pay tribute to atrocities in times of war. There's information about both of those talks on the inside of your program notes. Information will be up on our website in about a month about those, so check back at that time. And information about the exhibition Brave New Worlds is available in our current Walker magazine that you should pick up on your way out today. One last announcement before we get started. We are webcasting this event tonight, so we're live on the web right now. And what that means is that when we get to the Q&A session at the end, I ask that you use the microphones that the ushers will have in the aisles to ask your questions. If you just raise your hand, one of the ushers will come find you, and that way your voice can be recorded for our web listeners. And this talk will also be archived on the Walker channel, that you can access at channel.walkerart.org. And now I am happy to welcome to the stage Rain Taxi's editor Eric Lorberer, who will further introduce tonight's guest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure. I want to thank Sarah and everyone here at the Walker for collaborating with us and for making a space in this great contemporary art museum for the art of contemporary writing. If you're interested in the art of contemporary writing, I also want to invite all of you to Rain Taxi's next event, which is the Twin Cities Book Festival in October. And you get a sneak peek at some of the things that we're doing there on the back cover of the new issue of Rain Taxi that you received on your way in. And I invite you to check that out and also to look at our website, raintaxi.com, to see more of what's going on that day. It's a really fun day devoted to books and writing. Tonight gives me great pleasure to introduce Jerome Rothenberg, who has served the culture of poetry in manifold ways for nearly 5 decades. In his own accomplished and energetic verse, I'm thinking of volumes such as Poems for the Game of Silence, that Dada strain, the Lorca variations, and Seedings. He has excavated our modernity for us like a word-happy archaeologist, discovering the through lines of mythic revelation and oral tradition that persist in American language art. As the great poet Kenneth Rexroth once said of Rothenberg, no one writing poetry today has dug deeper into the roots of it. While pursuing his muse, he has also gifted us with a bevy of important translations from the likes of Paul Celan, Kurt Schwitters, Federico Garcia Lorca, and of course that obscure painter Pablo Picasso, among many others, and with an equally impressive number of important anthologies, ranging from the hugely influential Technicians of the Sacred to the recent mammoth and magnificent Poems for the Millennium. In all his cultural work, Rothenberg reminds us that history, geography, ethnicity, and culture stand behind each individual writer and artistic movement, that assemblage is not merely a modernist craft, but a primordial state, and that the oldest innovations of poetry are still open for reinvention in the ever-turning revolution of the word. I am delighted he can be here tonight to lead us on this poetic pilgrimage, whose starting point is a riveting yet little-known body of writing by the 20th century's most influential artist, a fitting reminder that there's always more to know about what we thought we knew already. Please welcome Jerome Rothenberg.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you all for, for being here. I'll be doing this in, I suppose, in three parts. A written talk, very brief, on Picasso's poetry as it relates also to a phenomenon of painters who are also poets, artists who are poets, and maybe by extension poets who are artists in a visual sense. I'll read some of the translations in a book that I co-edited, co-translated with Pierre Joris, he mostly focusing on the French and I on the Spanish, and with the assistance of some 13 other poets and translators who we commissioned for the occasion. And then I'll follow through from that to some work of my own that I think is related. So said Picasso to his assistant amanuensis Jaime Sabartes, April 1936. I abandon sculpture, engraving, and painting to dedicate myself entirely to song. The entirely didn't last, but for the next almost 25 years, he was a fabulous and prolific poet. Now, there was a curious and probably terminal moment in the relation between Picasso and Gertrude Stein that came at a time in 1935 when Picasso found himself unable to paint and turned to writing, to poetry, as an alternative form of expression. When he showed some of the resultant work to Stein, or read it to her as the story goes, her response was quick and unequivocal. The egotism of a painter, she wrote and later lectured him in explanation, is an entirely different egotism from the egotism of a writer. And again, recounting the event on her own, this was his life for 2 years. Of course, he who could write so well with drawings and with colors, knew very well that to write with words was for him not to write at all. In saying which, she deliberately extended her conclusion to all painters who are by nature and by vocation different from all writers. Some such separation of the arts is probably a more common idea than that of their unification, though hardly a settled point, either then or now. A somewhat similar view, for example, turns up in Stein's younger contemporary, Ezra Pound, who demanded in his 1914 Vortex Manifesto a separate defining characteristic for each of a range of arts. Quote, every concept, every emotion presents itself to the vivid consciousness in some primary form. It belongs to the art of this form, if sound to music, if formed words to literature, if the image to poetry, form to design, color and position to painting, form or design in three planes to sculpture, movement to the dance or to the rhythm of music or of dances. True enough. Pound, of course, was speaking here of a separation of the arts and not of a restriction on the capacity of an artist to move from one to another. He himself, it should be pointed out, experimented later with musical composition, an operatic work called Villon, to say nothing of the occasional construction of furniture, which he did on the model, perhaps, or perhaps not, of William Morris. It's curious, too, that where Pound asserts that the vorticist will not use only the primary media of his art, he cites as his primary examples in painting Kandinsky, Picasso. While Kandinsky in 1914 was already into something like a painting based on color in position, he was also experimenting with poetry and multimedia performance, a mixing of the arts. Concerning his book of poems, Klänge, German for sounds, the Dada poet Hugo Ball wrote in 1917, "Nowhere else, even among the futurists, has anyone attempted such a daring purification of language." And to mix things even further, Kandinsky had already, in the Blaue Reiter Almanac, published the text and score for work called Der gelbe Klang, the yellow sound, as his own modernist, expressionist version of Wagnerian Gesamtkunstwerk, total work of art. At this point, let me just suggest that Pound's and even Kandinsky's crossing of genre boundaries was rather modest, even at times rather hokey, compared to Stein's far-reaching, truly radical experiments with language. Still, as practitioners, they were open to the crossing, Kandinsky a germinal figure in that direction, while other artists went even further, functioned as language poets, language artists, so to speak, or as creators of unprecedented works in defiance of all genres. Among those who sensed an underlying unity of poetry and art and practiced it were Schwitters, Marinetti, Arp, Picabia, Apollinaire, and American Marsden Hartley, and to a lesser degree, perhaps, Clay, André Breton, Lorca, Miro, Ernst, Duchamp, and Dali. French poet Stéphane Mallarmé, whose coup de dé, throw of the dice, comes at the end of the 19th century, might be another example of a poet creating a major and germinal work of verbo-visual art. There is, with all of this, a strong sense of the interpenetration of poetry and art, along with a welcoming of artists who work both fields, or, better, fused them. Collaborations between visual and verbal artists were even more common in books and performances, in manifestos. I'm thinking here of the activity around Russian futurist books, Italian futurist performances, Dada evenings at Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich and later in Paris and Berlin, and the profusion of collaborative livres d'art, artist books that involved most of the major artists and poets of French modernism. And these are only the best-known examples among many others. Of the artists who crossed over on their own, it seems to me that those in the early part of the 20th century were primarily visual artists, painters, rather than poets, conceivably because increasingly open forms of poetry and the blurring of distinctions between poetry and prose allowed any literate, any writing person to enter the ranks, while painting and sculpture retained a more specialized status, at least until the final decades of the 20th century. And at that point, the hybridizations were widespread and extraordinary. Having said this much, I will now limit myself to a brief consideration of Picasso's poetry and try a much too rapid assessment of what he was able to achieve as a poet, a language artist. Then I'll end up with the reading of some of his poems, some of mine, a celebration maybe of the linkage between poetry and art. Picasso, much like some of the other crossover artists I've mentioned, presented himself at some point in his life and work as being primarily a poet. This is possibly an indication of the prestige around the idea of poetry and poet at a time when the idea of art was already coming into question. Schwitters, for example, who was into the making of poetry, of language art, throughout his entire artistic life, cited poetry as a primary activity and included it always as one of the arts whose boundaries from the other arts he intended to erase. And Picasso, for all of his acclaim and celebrity as the century's principal visual artist, was reported to have said of himself, a quote, that long after his death, his writing would gain recognition and encyclopedias would say, Picasso, Pablo Ruiz, Spanish poet who dabbled in painting, drawing, and sculpture. Picasso's engagement with poetry and with poets goes back to his early days in Paris, but the writing itself comes only in the mid-1930s when it erupts with considerable force and continues until the creation of an ultimate masterwork, The Burial of the Count of Orgaz in 1959. The earlier Cubist connections are the better known and involve an interplay with a range of poets living and working in Paris: Stein, Apollinaire, Jacob, Reverdy, and Salmon, among others. The chalked sign over his studio door in Montmartre read, "Au rendezvous des poètes," meeting place of poets. And the exchanges with poet friends would have been not only about the new painting, but the new poetry as well. The new spirit, or new mind, Apollinaire had called it in a famous essay. Writes his principal biographer, John Richardson, about the ambience of what he calls Picasso's think tank. It enabled the artist to become vicariously a poet in paint, not yet a poet in words. And even so, the verbally dense newspaper collages and isolated stenciled words that mark his Cubist canvases give us a measure of how far he had already gone in opening his art to language. Through all his work, in fact, there was a need for poetry, a need for poetry. That phrase is John Cage's in relation to his own writings as a poet. And that need brought Picasso to an alignment in the 1920s and 30s with the younger poets who made up the core of Paris-based surrealism. Prior to the 1924 Manifesto of Surrealism and the founding that December of their magazine, La Révolution Surréaliste, members of the about-to-be surrealist group countersigned André Breton's essay, Hommage à Picasso, which appeared in the June 20th issue of the newspaper magazine Paris Journal. From 1924 to 1929, works by Picasso were reproduced in 8 of the 11 issues of La Révolution Surréaliste, and he was often cited by Breton and other poets as an exemplary surrealist figure. Their prophet, Patrick O'Brien writes, with sufficient quotations to back it up, or Breton, who had claimed him as one of us, quote, "If surrealism is to adopt a line of conduct, it has only to pass where Picasso has already passed and where he will pass again." The full engagement with poetry came in 1935, a hiatus in his painting practice touched off by a financially distressing divorce, but also, I would suggest, by a sense of the impending war that was building up in Spain with dire consequences for the rest of Europe. Here is how it first comes into his notebook writing in an extended piece of unpunctuated and multiphasic work of prose and poetry, dated 18 April 35. If I should go outside, the wolves would come to eat out of my hand. Just as my room would seem to be outside of me, my other earnings would go off around the world, smashed into smithereens. But what is there to do today? It's Thursday, everything is closed, it's cold, the sun is whipping anybody I could be, and there's no helping it. So many things come up so that they throw the roots down by their hairs out in the bull ring, stenciled into portraits, not to make a big deal of the day's allotments, but today has been a winter, and the hunter back with his accounts askew, how great this year has been for putting in preserves like these and thus and so, and always things are being left behind. Some tears are laughing without telling tales again, except around the picture frame the news arrived that this time we would only see the spring at night, and that a spider crawls across the paper where I'm writing, that the gift is here, the others putting ties on for the holidays, that we've already had it for the nonce, and that it's just the start this time around. And so on for another 20 pages of margin-to-margin writing, which would be typical of most of his later poetry, not automatic in any strict sense, but heavily worked over and marking the beginning of several years of poetry, which he would practice sometimes as an almost daily exercise. The big prose poems have no titles, in fact, but only dates. The let-up came around 1941, but it was during the war years, in fact, that he wrote his two plays, Desire, Trapped by the Tail, and The Four Little Girls. The Desire, Trapped by the Tail became part of the standard modernist, experimental, avant-garde European theater repertory, which I first saw back in the 1950s and the beginnings of the living theater before they went into big epical works. And in the 1950s, he produced two major works of poetry, Hunk of Skin and The Burial of the Count of Orgaz, the title of the last, if not its content, derived from El Greco's great painting. There is little that is trivial in Picasso's work as a poet, and the energy and rapid-fire shift of images brought from surrealists and Breton the response, totally different from Stein's, that Picasso had joined the ranks of those who were pushing poetry, pushing language to its limits, even in some ways beyond the workings of the surrealists themselves. So Michel Leiris, poet, anthropologist, and intellectual, in a later overview declared that Picasso was, quote, an insatiable player with words, one of those who, like James Joyce in his Finnegan's Wake, displayed an equal capacity to promote language as a real thing, one might say, and to use it with as much dazzling liberty. Which is quite a statement. So from here on, I'm switching to poetry reading mode to read and to perform first a number of Picasso's poems translated from Spanish and French, and then a range of poems of my own in celebration. Not of Picasso's work as such, but of a range of avant-gardes from the early 20th century, nearly 100 years ago and therefore approaching a centenary of sorts. Much of my own work in recent years has involved the forging of a link between our times, starting for me in the 1980s, with a book from which I'll be reading, and later a performance work called That Dada Strain. Picasso, there's a poem of E. Cummings that starts, Picasso, you give us things which bulge. A very little one, and actually in lines. 14th November, 35. Eugenia, fragrant, little chapel of guitar, strings, clothed in poppy black carbuncles. 15th November, 35. When the bull opens the gateway of the horse's belly with his horn and sticks his snout out to the edge, listen in the deepest of all deepest holds and with St. Lucy's eyes to the sounds of moving vans tight-packed with picadors on ponies cast off by a black horse, and escaping now and rising like a butterfly the mangled belly of the mare a little white horse sees inside the conduit which sings as the blood dances, trickling from a faucet in her breast. A circus horse stands upright on his feet, rear end decked out with blue and silver, white and blue feathers set on top atop his head between his two ears, and a pair of hands applauding plucks his eyes out from in front. The team of mules that block his sight, that bounce and drag his guts along the sand, and screws the eye of the photographer somewhere above the banquet table and pulls the wire out a little at a time into the out of doors and winds it in a ball, then draws a likeness of his face so beautiful onto a silver plaque that spatters, clenched fist, clean the sun. 18th November, 35. This stupid old age fucking phantom shoved between her skirts the farts that gnaw her nose with so much bullshit, blissed out rights to left, the truth distorted from the years of bending under the shameful weight of all you've known and learned by way of enemas from all those cooked books that boil down the praises of their blackest sauces that have made the toilet overflow with just a single stroke of magic marker, slowly growing silent and then shooting at the postman who takes a whiff of every letter and then holds it captive, nothing more than looking underneath her skirts, her spring night fragrance, nothing more than bliss under her arm, enough for dog to howl and eat a plastic bone and gobble up the night remembrance of a visit made to say that that's the least of all my worries with those two now that it's nearly 1 a.m. today, the 19th of this month, November, in the year of 35. I'm going to unscrew this rotten light bulb teeth of clothes around here on my bed so I can sleep a while and get up early and can send it flying with a well-placed kick with a bouquet of fuck-it-all skyscrapers. (24th, 28th November, 35). Tongue of fire fans the face inside the flute, the cup that singing nibbles the blue knife wound lightly, lightly. Seated in the toro's eye, inscribed inside its head adorned with jasmines, waiting for the veil to swell the crystal fragment when wrapped in fold of cape to handled sword caresses, gushing, handing bread out to the blind man and the lilac-covered dove, its wickedness crammed tight against the burning lemon's lips with horn contorted, spooking the cathedral with its farewell gestures, swooning in his arms without an olé, a glance that blows apart the morning radio that in its kisses photographs the bedbug sun, sucks out the fragrance from the dying hour and moves across the page in flight. It tears the flowers into shreds and carries them away, tucked in between a sighing wing and fear that still can smile, a knife that jumps for joy right now, this very day, left floating in whatever way it wants to, this exact and necessary moment at the summit of the well, a cry rose-colored for the hand that casts it down, a little act of Christian love. For the next poem, if my signal gets back to the booth there, I want to have a visual up on the screen, because the poem, the words come with this visualization, written between 15th and 18th of June 1937, and so into the period of Guernica. And for Picasso, too, an ongoing concern with war, the terrors of war, what his fellow Spaniard and painter Goya depicted as disasters of war. And Picasso, in a 1967 interview, so much later into his life, that death could fall from heaven on so many, right in the middle of rushed life, had a great meaning for me. The Dream and Lie of General Franco, 15th to 18th June 1937. Owl, fandango, escabeche, swords of octopus, of evil omen, furry dish rags, scalps afoot in middle of the skillet, bare balls popped into a cone of codfish sherbet, fried in scabies of his oxen heart, mouthful of marmalade, of bedbugs, of his words, silver bells and cockle shells and guts braided in a row, a pinky in erection, not a grape and not a fig, commedia dell'arte of bad weaving and smudged clouds, cosmetics of a garbage truck, the rape of Las Meninas, cries and outcries, casket on shoulders crammed with sausages and mouths, rage that contorts the drawing of a shadow that lashes teeth nailed into sand, the horse ripped open top to bottom in the sun, which reads it for the flies who tack a rocket of white lilies to the knots spliced in the sardine-heavy nets, a lamp of lice where dog is in a knot of rats, and hideouts in a palace of old rags, the banners frying in the skillet twisted black of ink sauce spilled in drops of blood that gun him down, the street soars in the clouds, its feet bound to a sea of wax that makes its guts rot, and the veil that covers it is singing, dancing, mad with sorrow. A flight of fishing poles, alhiqui and alhiqui of the moving van, first class interment, broken wings spinning in the spider web of dry bread and clear water, a paella made of sugar and a velvet that paints a whiplash on his cheeks, the light blocked out, the eyes before the mirror that make monkey shines, the chunk of nougat in the flames that gnaws itself, the lips around the wound, cries of children, cries of women, cries of birds, cries of flowers, cries of wood and stone, cries of bricks, cries of furniture, of beds, of chairs, of curtains, of casseroles, of cats and papers, cries of smell that claw themselves of smoke that gnaws the neck, of cries that boil in cauldron, and the rain of birds that floods the sea, that eats into the bone and breaks the teeth, biting the cotton that the sun wipes on its plate, that bourse and bank hide in the footprint left embedded in the rock. This is, next translation is not by me, but by Diane Rothenberg, my wife and a sometime translator. And this is dated December 25th, 39. The coal folds the sheets embroidered with the wax of eagles, falling in a shower of laughs, the icy tangle of the flames from the empty sky and the rippled skin of the house in a corner at the bottom of the drawer of the wardrobe vomits its wings. Clacking at the window, forgotten on the emptiness, the ripped black sheet of icy honey, of the flames in the sky and the torn skin at the house in a corner at the bottom of the drawer, the eagle vomits its wings. And the torn skin of the house, clacking at the window, forgotten at the center of infinite emptiness, the black honey of the ripped sheet by the icy flames of the sky, the eagle vomits its wings. At the infinite center of the emptiness on the ripped skin of the house, clacking at the window, the naked arms of the honey of the black sheet, ripped by the ice of flames of the stinking sky by the eagle vomiting its wings. The window forgotten at the center of the night shakes the black sheet devoured by the ice of the flames, the eagle vomits its wings on the honey of the sky. Immobile in the center of space, the ripped skin of the house shakes the black sheet of its window. The eagle caught in the ice vomits its wings in the sky. The black sheet of the window clacks on the cheek of the sky, carried away by the eagle vomiting its wings. Torn from the teeth of the wall of the house, the window shakes its sheet in the coal of the blue grilled by the lamps. The fingernails of the shutters give up the fight, its wings to chance. Part 2. Good evening, Monsieur. Good evening, Madam. And good evening, children. Big and small, damasked and striped in sugar and in marshmallow, clothed in blue, in black, and in lilac, mechanically malodorous, and cold, pug-nosed, one-eyed, irascible, and filthy on horseback, on crutches, pot-bellied and bald, made of sententiousness, sliced very fine by the machine to make terrified rainbows, just good to be thrown in the frying pan. Tell me, my dears, my loves, my little piggies, have you ever counted by holding your nose until 0, and if not, repeat with me the list of losing of all the lotteries? Before I ever came to it, in the 1960s, our fellow poet Paul Blackburn translated a small book of Picasso's that he called in English hunk of skin. And Paul took the liberty there of breaking these heavy prose paragraphs into verse lines. He lineated the poem, which is in multiple sections. And I want to read the opening of Paul's translation and the closing, with a memory here of Picasso being quoted again. He didn't write, as you know, didn't write about his art. He didn't write about his poetry. So what we get from him are quotations from people, and we have to take their word that that's actually what Picasso said. Critics have said that I was affected by surrealist poetry, as well as by family problems. Absolute nonsense. Basically, I've always written the same way. Poems about the postman or the priest. August 1st, 59. On the new lush grass at the well rim, a careless young man was sleeping almost nude, wearing skins of lamb or bear, next to the 2 or 3 predetermined cardinal points, frog and partridge outside and inside, crumbs set to soak next to the oven, their muletas and silken fabrics on top, and their table d'hote dinners of metal and hard-boiled egg and faster and running made hot coals and close enough to shoot a chicken and a seam of split watermelon hanging from every crow, nothing more. Waiting for the tambourine in the wing of a pine grove and the fringes of candlelight making their calculations on the taut fabric of stone woods, huddled among the groves of fig trees, casting their reckonings under the belly button of the mortar, hoarse with cries, and mending slid under the door, writ out with fat brush above the fragments of syrupy sky, posted as sentinel, edge of the crib, sparkling out. Crumbs and wolf whistles over the house, pitched into the sea, the house fly in the landscape, fried in the pan, freezing his hands on the water faucet spigot. And the last section of Hunk of Skin, I think in Spanish that's trozo de piel. Smoke of dried herbs, merry-go-round, wires, stone, wood, and whitewash, red wine, lees, hard liquor, rabbit, olives, table, chair, bottle, glass, brick, sand, black pepper and salt, lemon, orange shirt, underdrawers and stockings, and socks, stones, and more stones, and such, and such, and so, and such, and so, and such, and such, and so, and so, and such, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, and 9, and 10, and 11, and 12, and 13, and 14, and 15, and 16, and 17, and 18, and 19, and 20, and 21, and 22, and 23, and 24, and 25, and 26, and 27, and 28, and 29, and 30, and 31, and 32, and 33, and 34, and 35, and 36, and 37, and 38, and 39, and 40, and 41, and 42, and 43, and 44, and 45, and... The burial of the Count of Orgaz is also, I guess, in some sense, about the postman and the priest, and going into a sense of the folkloric and village life, and I have not been able to figure out its relationship to El Greco's great painting, The Burial of the Count of Orgaz. But I know it's there. So this is the ending of that poem, and you can kind of pick up what kind of narrative there has been in it. There did Finally arrived the card announcing the festivities on Monday night, and next morning at dawn there were fires and worms up every asshole, and sugar palms appeared in every window. The stars with pink and green cockades showed off their black hair to the sun down on their knees beside the well, and touched and then retouched their makeup, looking at the half moons on their fingernails and on the tiles with verdant clusters of black grapes in profile, on the swarming blues, the blue striped t-shirt, and the greenish blue, the sugared blues slapped on the pink, the purple diaper, of the lilac bunched up in the nest of the celestial purple, of the blue omphalos of the camp bed straightened up with the sunny smiles of she-goats and of he-goats on the bank of some old mountain stream with such good spirits and no laughs or cries. At 6 began the dance of all the old retainers of the houses, castles, railroad stations, taverns, bakeries, and tailor shops, and priests and barbers serving girls for fancy ladies, nursemaids, road gangs, all the girls from 2 weeks old to 40-something years decked out with roses and carnations, jasmine, spikenards, handed out the ritzy French toast to the young guys and the higher-ups. The sister of old Montserrat and La Pamela hit the jackpot and took off beaming to the olive grove. Then Don Augusto Manuel, the shameless, got soused up and sopping wet out on the Andalusian's veranda. Thanks be to the presence of the mayor's spirit, nothing came to pass, but things were ugly for the next 6 weeks, not counting holidays and Sundays. Here there was no one more in charge than me, said Senor Romanzo's peg-box de oficio and oldest brother of his kith and kin, Juan Pedro and Gonzalo de la Merced and Julia and Rufina, left without a father from the age of 2 days and a half, good form and cleaved from head to toe. They totaled up 1,000,000 hundredweights, and then the knackers lugged them down there on their backs. The baby of the bunch got married at age 80-something and gave birth at month's end to a burro. The other one got married to a crippled sandal weaver, and she gave her husband 10 blind rabbits and a partridge. The humongous woman stayed a widow well before she had the pair of watermelons that her husband, owner of the flea ranch, got for her one night at the Saints' Fair in the plaza hidden in the little boat. The children, Pedro, little Pedro, we won't speak of him no more, seeing how he acted, flashy Manolete-like, and wound up down and out, tough shit, and no one in his family would say hello to him. He ended like a doorman in a whorehouse in Chinatown. Janete was half a cretin, but very shrewd. He acted like a jerk when he would play the lottery and won the big one. He got married with some babe, the bastard daughter of the priest, they said, who cheated on him and gave birth from a young dim-witted bull in the Sigüenza bull ring, was knocked off by El Palau on February 13th. And they had to deck him out with 29 pairs of fire-shooting banderillas. Gonzalo went to war in Africa. He went out. Nothing more was heard from him. He didn't marry. He had no children. This family is like a paragon even today. A lot of things are told about them, true or false. We have to factor into our account of the corrida of this primitive humanity recorded on a postcard. The melon slices and the scraps of blotting paper upside down, and snookering the surf that licks its chops over half. A watermelon, its wheelbarrow rattles in the whitish foam of someone's linen laid out on the roof. The smooth silkers of her body lunges at the knacker, and the sword hilt thrust into the honey bun of where she dances. The refrain that makes the jasmine twinkle on the vine sings of a light that blows in from the garden, warm with love, and with a pinch of blue that dangles from the grapes. The rosy evening flavor whistles up its snail shells in its arms. It rocks a drop of dew erupting in the lambkin's fleece. An onion unwinds its strings inside the caramel awakening of the moon. The silver lace, the pigeons raise up, making light of their sad plight. I don't think that rhyme exists in the Spanish, making light of their sad plight. A younger contemporary was Federico Garcia Lorca. And here I switch, I leave Picasso, who in that Spanish Civil War that so moved Picasso was himself martyred, as you know, taken out and shot in the body, never recovered. So at one time I became a translator of Lorca, having discovered a book published many years after his death of young poems of Lorca's. And for reasons not to go into here, being frustrated when those translations were incorporated into a big book of collected translations, total translations, all translations of Lorca that Forrest Strauss published, and where I had been promised that the mine would be published as a separate book, and therefore my homage to Lorca. I took Lorca's vocabulary for individual poems, took all the nouns and used them as building blocks for a series of poems called the Lorca Variations. So I'll read two poems from that. Lorca's Spain, a homage, and of course it would be Picasso's Spain also. Lorca's Spain, a homage. Beginning with olive trees, shadows. Beginning with roosters, crystal. Beginning with castanets and almonds, fishes. This is a homage to Spain. This mists dogs, this silences rubber. This is Saturn. Beginning with yellow, eclipse. Beginning with needles, insomnia. Beginning with baskets, the moon. Who is naked? The imagination, wrote Lorca, is seared. This is a homage to water, beginning and end. The Lorca Variations 19. And of course, the condition that that continues sadly into our own time. So subtitled "In a Time of War." It's in 7 parts, but I won't read the numbers. In a time of war, snuffed out in mind or heart, the war sucks up the dew, dries out the spring, the water thickens, daisies wilt, a stone drops through a dark lake near a silver mountain, nightingales lie dead, a tremor uproots 3 black trees, uproots the memory of trees and oxen, the poppies from another war, another homeland. War makes a prison house, 1,000 cells crisscross in a universe we enter down a single road. A widow in the darkness gathers roots, the slender stem of an acacia curving in the love she brings, a love that floats like butterflies over the road to war. Inside the glass, a crystal moon lives. War will shatter into flowers in the endless night. Once the night grew tamer, once the stars devoured by war inside their hive fled to the open air. Moon, acacia, water, lily, star, even a year of war won't hide or tame them. War waiting in the gateway to the hive. Before Picasso really wrote poetry, but after he created those openings for art and painting, at the time of another war, the First World War, in Zurich, young poets and artists were forming the movement called Dada. So I'm going to read from a work of mine called that Dada strain. Again, it ties, the reality of wars, of that war. and poems are addressed to Schwitters, to Zara, to other of the Dada poets and painters, and this focuses on Hugo Ball, one of the founders of cabaret, Voltaire, who left Dada quickly, as a good Dadaist should, ran off into the mountains of Switzerland to meditate, ruminate, and to die there as a kind of Catholic Dada saint. So a short poem opening it, and then a sound poem without words by Hugo Ball, and then a poem addressed to Hugo Ball. That Dada strain, the zigzag mothers of the gods of science, the lunatic fixed stars and pharmacies, fathers who left the tents of anarchism unguarded, the Arctic bones strung out on Saint-Germain like tom-toms, living light bulbs, aphrodisia. Art is junk, the urinal says. Dig a hole and swim in it. A message from the grim computer. Ye are hamburgers. June 23rd, 1916. For that evening's reading, he had made himself a special costume. His legs were in a shiny blue cylinder which came up to his hips so that he looked like an obelisk. Over it he wore a huge coat collar cut out of cardboard, scarlet on the inside, gold on the outside. It was fastened at the neck in such a way that he could give the impression of wing-like movement by raising and lowering his elbows. He also wore a high blue and white striped witch doctor's hat. Caravana! Olifanto Bamla, oh Falibambla, Grosiga Abla Orem, Egiga Goramen, Higo, Bloiko, Rusula, Huju, Holaka, Holala, Blago Bung, Blago Bung, Blago Bung, Boso Fataka. Shampa, Vula, Vusa, Olabo, Tata Gorem, Heshige, Tsumada, Vulubu, Subudu, Olu, Subudu, Tumba, Ba, Kusa, Gauma, Ba, A glass tube ecstasy for Hugo Ball. A glass tube for my leg, says Hugo Ball. My hat a cylinder in blue and white. The night, the German ostriches, the sink he pisses in. All these become his world. His Dada song, begun there, holds the image until it comes at us. The image from its cross looks down, a ribbon, a revolver, mud. These contribute to his death, also to what his death contributes later. Too hysterical, too sick with God and time, a carousel, a roasted poet, fish, the queen says to his mind, and enters where the street of mirrors start. She sees his face reflected in hunger of the world as pain, the consciousness of death. Not why we die, but why we dream about it, and why our dreams can't save the dying remnant. Hugo, as I write this poem, the voice cries from a further room. The dancer, singer calls me from a further room. I step into an obelisk below the waist. My mouth opens to sing, but freezes shut in grief for you. Umbula, take, bitly, solancola, the collapse of language, tabla, tokta, tokta, takabala, taka, tak, a glass tube, ecstasy, escapes from time, babula, lam, the image and the word over your bed hang crucified. Again, the cabaret explodes. Again, fatigue, 1 foot in glass, a glass nerve, and a priestly gas pump pulls her hair out. In 1997, I was beginning to work on the Picasso translations, and that coincided with a couple or 3 months spent in Paris. So the being in Paris is, of course, also colored by Picasso. And the sense of living in, like most of us, I love Paris, but I think of it also as a cemetery city, because it's the only city in which I go regularly to cemeteries. The presence of the Picasso generation was very strong for me. But it was also a year in which, as happens, many close friends began to die. That was on my mind as well. It was also in Paris and France that year, a year of a recession, and there were many more beggars than usual in the streets, and bread lines and such things. I was struck by what it seemed to me the strangeness in certain of the beggars, how well dressed they were. Before coming to Paris, my wife and I had been visiting in the Pyrenees, and took a ride by cable up to one of the mountains, and then came down again. And somewhere midway down, the power went out. And there was a 300-meter drop. It was very far down, and it was an existential moment. So that I began to smoke again. So the poem with which I'll end the presentation and then go on to a question session if you have questions. It's called 3 Paris Elegies. While I was writing it, the great new music and jazz musician Steve Lacy had given me a CD of Joan LaBarbera performing, or a performance of 3 voices for Joan LaBarbera, written by Morton Feldman, and with a text by Franco Harra, great American poet. So if you hear the name Franco Harra come into this, but hear it too in terms of Picasso. Into my own dark Sunday light approaches like the moon through feathers that's no sooner seen than sunk by blindness, and the thought that everyone is dead around a city that's about to vanish as it has before, sucked down an empty pocket, oversized and with a smell of earth, the bright adventurers of 1910 whose streets these were, sharing a common grave with those who followed, reaching even to the place where you and I are waiting, with the friends who drop out one by one like cyber monkeys flying into mindless space. Above a gorge we hung and swayed, The mountains were alive to every side, stone witnesses. The air was still with only a distant puff of wind. We sat suspended by an iron wire, voiceless. No one to talk to in the world but you and me. That revelation, I think I prize its emptiness the most. So even now, arrived in Paris, I sit alone and feel it bursting down my chest, electric, final rush of footsteps down an empty street. Why does a well-dressed man come up to me and ask me for a handout? This is a dream, I think. It can't be real. Why does a smiling mother dressed for church reach out a hand to touch me, shadows all around her, sitting on the ground? Why does she ask for help, and why do I keep walking past her, where there is no street or sun, even in Paris on this hottest day in summer? What is this sound that comes at us around a corner, sound of a wave suspended in the air, of hives of bees, of hands applauding in the dark? Who is the man who wears a flower in his ear, a shirt with many folds, a vest, a beard, the buttons glowing like electric sparks? The more I search his features, I can see his lips are gone, his tongue is heavy, hanging to one side and forming words that never reach me, that the darkness covers. All the people on this street sit flat against the wall, some open-eyed, some sunk in a deep sleep. All are dressed up. The men wear business suits and blazers, a cardigan, a double-breasted jacket, a tuxedo tie and tails, but have no coats or hats. Their shoes are simple, always a dark brown or black with marks of sand from garden walks in Paris, laces open sometimes without socks. And the women well-dressed too, although the hair of one is hanging limply. With another's there are open spots that show her skull. A third one has the traces of a beard, a large wet stain under one armpit. Just look at them, and they begin to talk, the way the birds talk. Feathers that the wind is blowing swirl across the square. We sit in paradise and pass a ball between us, papers at our feet. Then when it's time to leave, we walk around a corner, climb the little flight of stairs, and hear them following. The rush of music from a distant time, a woman's voice becoming regular, the words emerging, low and high, relentless, openings, processions. And it's Picasso in the lead, a little man with hairy shoulders. He is stripped down to his running shorts like Franco, both of them now stars for Mineola Prep. Both now declare their love of evil. With Apollinaire here too, his head no bigger than a thumbnail, flanked by Gertrude Stein, eyes like a crazy doll's, and someone looking like my father, Max Jacob, wrapped in a monk's brown cloak, down which his body disappears. Here in a world where there are only little people, phantoms, where the sky is not a sky, the earth is shrinking daily under silver plastic, disappearing, slipping through my hands like balls in a pachinko parlor, eyes revolving like red lights. To end here in La République with all the other dead, the hungry ghosts under our windows, a soup kitchen for the dead, the ones who run, the ones who squat now on the grass. They speak our frailty, the doom built into life, decomposition, chaos, anarchy, confusion, worse confounded, helter, skelter, squalor, out of whack and out of order, out of kilter, out of money, out of time, and out of place, and out of breath, and out of work, and out of hope, and out of power, because the men who come to us, though dead, are just like us and stare at us like fallen princes. We welcome you to death, they say, their looks dividing us in two. The numbers dance again behind our eyes. The circles break. The man holding a clock up to his ear will count the silence. Every day is summer. What was once alive is gone. And what has yet to be alive is also gone. Thank you. What's the procedure? Are the poems perfectly clear?
There are also books for sale
Yeah.
of Jerome's writings and the Picassos, the anthology of Picasso's poems.
Yeah, look.
The cart.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about translating Picasso, right? What seemed to be the complete written writings of Picasso were published by a big French publisher, Gallimard. It must have been in the early 90s. And in a very large format, and with a lot of reproductions of the manuscript. So obviously, it's still focusing on on the hand and the Picasso's ability to draw and were visual works of art, but also all of the Spanish poems translated into French and all of the French appearing in Picasso's French, and we'd seen a little bit before, and principally for myself, Pierre Joris, who worked with me in Paul Blackburn's translations. But the visual look of it, that was one of the surprising things, particularly if you're fascinated by the idea of the difficult, that appearing most of it as unbroken and unpunctuated blocks of prose, and written out, with justified, margins. There's a kind of, as you come at that, it's a sort of terrifying look to it. Where do I take time for breath? Where do I stop? What pause is there in this? And as you read it, the rush, the quick pace, or it seems to be the quick pace of the language, and then you find out, from reading what Picasso had to say about writing, and also looking at the manuscripts, that there's a lot of writing and rewriting, going into it. That it's, that although automatic writing was that was the rallying call of the surrealist poets, automatic writing. But they didn't do automatic writing either, and Picasso didn't, do automatic writing. But he did. It's a difficult writing, and so Pierre and I, given permission to do this, plunged into it. And then we decided we would also, call others into the game of Picasso, and see what they would come up with. The complete list of poets. Paul Blackburn, who had died 1971, but who was for us the first real Picasso translator. David Ball, Manuel Brito from the Canary Islands, who assisted me with the Spanish, Anselm Hollow and Waldman, who have been published here, I believe, by Coffee House, Robert Kelly, Suzanne Jill Levine, Ricardo Nierenberg, Diane Rothenberg, Cole Swenson, Jason Weiss, Mark Weiss, and Laura Wright. It was, of course, it was diving into Picasso's language, and although he's rough, there's a rawness. I don't think even so much a rawness of the languages, but it's a rawness of mind. It's a lot of it is an irritating writing, and for me it got me back. The visual work, had become very familiarized, and I think lost some of its some of its bite, its roughness, its rawness, its things that he said with language, as far as its relationship to Picasso overall as an artist, and I think to all of us who engage in this, what to say, maybe somewhat like the surrealists back then, a feeling really that Picasso was one of us. So that was, that was kind of nice. It was, yeah.
I'm guessing, I know it's true for me, that the reason I didn't have a question is because I had such a hard time with so much of the poetry. I found it very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, your poem at the end was the one that I found most accessible. Also the poem, The Sounds, I really enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if you tried not only to translate the poetry, but to make meaning of what you were translating, to determine the message, if there were one, in each poem. It was really challenging for me, and I wasn't able to follow
I know exactly what you're saying.
And I wondered if the dearth of questions has to do with that.
It might. I can't answer that. It might have to do with that. In fact, we, speak. I think I can speak for all of those involved in the translation. We specifically did not want to, by translating, make it clearer than it was. Right, and there's a temptation to do what you're suggesting. Translators often do that. And it's a tough. One of the surprises was that he wrote, a tough poetry. It shouldn't have been a surprise because initially, the paintings are tough. But it came, as a surprise that he did that. Remember in what I quoted from the French poet Michel Leiris, comparing, Picasso, I think he exaggerates, but the comparison is to James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. Now if I had been up here doing a reading from certain, from most of, there are a few sections of Finnegan's Wake that come through, more, clearly. Of course, it's Joyce's language. I don't want to make the comparison that Leiris makes, but he's citing Finnegan's Wake because of that quality. It's for better or worse, it's an occulted work. It's a dark work. It's a work that the one does not easily penetrate. But I just found it incredibly pleasurable, to get into Picasso's language, and the mind, the spirit that's that's expressed through that, and to take that for myself for a period of time while I was engaged in the process of translation. But then I'm giving you. See, I was actively. It was an interactive process for me. And the one I read most frequently when I use Picasso poems in my own readings is I will confess, is the Dream and Lie of Franco, because it's got a title. And the title tells you something. And because at the end, it's got a context, that's sort of easy to communicate. Spain, Civil War, bombings, and then when you get the when it moves, through a Picasso-ish landscape, wordscape, and then you come at the end to the, to the listing of the cries of people and things, objects, and animals, and of course, even if I hadn't flashed the images, the sort of comic strip, imagery there, most everybody here would, make some connection to Guernica, and the cries inherent in that. But there's no question that that the works of language art can be more difficult than paintings, because there is that habit of paintings in a gallery. I go from one, okay, go to the other. It's kind of you're not put through any process, although the works may, in their own way, be as reluctant to offer up their secrets as as the poems are. But that was a good question. Thank you.
In relation to that Dream and Lie of Franco poem, was it common for Picasso to have sketches amongst the poems? Were the poems a way of working out things he was also working out in his visual art? Or is the poetry mostly separate from the visual aspect of his work?
No. I think as you read through it and think about the art that he's making, there are images in common. There's a lot of food imagery, as they would turn up in still lifes of food. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of sexuality. And most of it I would say rather nasty sexuality. It's but Picasso's erotic drawings and paintings are not, are not Dolce style. They're not sweet style. They're not. So I think it illuminates, and relates to, a whole range of Picasso work. There are there's a sense that runs through it, which is whether he was ultimately hypocritical about it or not. Why even bring that up? A sense of the poor and the oppressed, which goes back to the earliest paintings, to his anarchist days in Barcelona. And that things that he carried with him into Paris as well. I take that aspect of Picasso most seriously. But he's working in of course with the poems. It's an art in time. It extends in time. So a lot more that can come into a page of packed prose, when he opens himself up to a rapid-fire change of images. Whatever terms used to be used for that kind of thing, automatic writing or spontaneous prose or stream of consciousness. It gives the impression of being fast and fevered writing. Although he swears that there's a lot of thought and change and so forth, really speaks out against the notion of automatic writing. I don't speak out against the notion of that, but he does. He's interesting. I was also not aware of how very literate a man he was. And he was. Most people who write with that degree of density and vocabulary and so forth are, are literate people. Well, thank you. That satisfies my need for questions.